Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the third day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 20th of Nisan 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. We will read Parashat Shmini this coming Shabbat, and it is the third day of Hilchot Pesach and the fifth day of the Omer. Let's begin. We'll start with the Parashah. We're going to begin with the specific Parashah that's being read on the day of the seventh day of Pesach, the Yom Tov day of the seventh day of Pesach. So we know, according to the Torah, that there is a special Yom Tov on Pesach, not just the first day of the 7 days, but the seventh day of Pesach is its own holiday, and it's called the seventh day of Pesach. So it is the seventh day. It's not its own holiday in the fact that it is separate from Pesach, but it is its own Yom Tov, compared to the other days of Pesach, which are Chol Hamoed days, which are days in which we do some work, we don't do some other work, we're sort of on Chag, sort of not. This is a Yom Tov. This is a day where we are, just like the first day, obligated to actually rest and obligated to do most of the same things we do on Shabbat. And it's interesting, I think, really, it's incredible, the Torah portion that is picked for this day. And I think it's important that we as Jews can tap into this and understand what actually is going on. You see, in our the Torah reading for the first day of Pesach is in the beginning of the redemption itself. It's right when the Jewish people are beginning to be redeemed in Parashat Bo, beginning, and right when basically the Jewish people are told that they can leave Egypt. They haven't even left Egypt yet. They're just told that they can leave, and sort of preparations for leaving itself. And then the parsha that is read on the seventh day of Pesach, this special holiday, is the Song of the Sea. Is the Jewish people leaving, walking through on dry land through the Red Sea, this incredible, famous miracle, and of course the Egyptians being destroyed by those same waters after they leave. And this is both days are incredible days of redemption, incredible days of release, of being able to leave, of being able to get up and choose one's own destiny, but they're marked very differently, right? The first one is more theoretical. We're told, oh, finally we can leave, but we still actually haven't left yet. And we have to do all these preparations to leave. And the Egyptians are still very much alive. Like, they're still very much there. And it's a very different situation. We're just trying to find some definitions sort of as a Jewish people and what this might mean to us and what this might look like. And so really it's the beginning of the redemption. But the seventh day of Pesach and the going through the sea, this great miracle, really marked the end of Egyptians sort of chasing us, right? The end of our oppressor being chased us. They were drowned by the Red Sea. Once we walked through the Red Sea and the Egyptians drowned in it and then were destroyed, our oppressors, the ones we were most afraid of, are gone. And so there's a different feeling when, okay, your oppressor tells you can leave versus now there's no more oppressor, right? Those are very different joys. And I think it really taps into the meaning of the holiday itself, of the beginning of Pesach should be about conceptually being able to leave, and that you finally achieved being able to leave and being able to free oneself and to celebrate that. But then the seventh day is actually the moment when you've actually left. Like, what is that feeling like when you've actually turned the corner and now you know you're not going back, and you can't go back even if you wanted to, right? The Egyptians are gone now, and now you really are able to live out your own capacity as a nation. And I think that's what that special joy of the seventh day of Pesach is supposed to bring on to us. And honestly, every time when we read the Song of the Sea, we should be thinking of that. And I guess what's even more incredible about this is the Torah reading itself over a Pesach actually follows the amount of days it took. So according to the Torah, right, it was on the 15th of Nisan when the Jewish people left Egypt. right? But it took 7 days to get to the Red Sea, to actually get to the miracle of the Red Sea. And on the 7th day is when they actually walk through the Red Sea. So actually, what the Torah is trying to narrate, and the holiday sequence of the readings is supposed to narrate, is this journey through, like, the beginning of Pesach is when the Jewish people begin to leave, and the end of Pesach is when they've actually left. So the whole entire days of Pesach, all the days of Pesach, are this process of leaving, and nowhere during Pesach have we actually fully left, right? It's all the process of leaving. And once we've actually left and got out of Egypt, it's actually the holiday itself is actually over. So the holiday of Pesach is not about being gone, but the process of leaving. And I think that's really deep that the rabbis are able to communicate this in such a beautiful way through the Torah portions and the Torah readings they pick to read. And again, it just shows the depth of the rabbis and the depth of this incredible holiday Pesach. All right, on to the Mishnah Torah. Today, we're going to learn our last day of Pesach halacha learning. It's really been a wonderful 30-day period of learning and preparing for Pesach together. And it's really been a wonderful time learning these laws. We'll learn more next year. We're going to switch to a different topic starting in our next session, our next episode. So this is really our last day of learning the laws. And it's we're going to end on a good one. We're going to end at chapter 7 of Mishnah Torah, leavened and unleavened bread, chametz matzah, halacha 6 and 7. And this is a famous halacha that is important. And I think it's important to remember that this is halacha. This is not just a spiritual phrase. So halacha 6 begins, Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu ba'atzmo yatsa ata mishibud Mitzrayim. In each and every generation, a person must present himself as if he, or an interesting translation, I'm following Safaria here, laharot, to show himself or to appear as, laharot et atzmo, but it's laharot et atzmo, to present himself. So you can understand why then the Safaria translation is actually pretty good, to present himself, but it's a funny thing, laharot, to cause to show to himself, as if he himself now left the slavery of Egypt. So as Deuteronomy 6:23 states, he took us out from there. So chapter 6:23 says he specifically, Otanu hotzi misham, us, he took out from there. And regarding this matter, God commanded the Torah, remember that you were a slave. And remember that you were a slave, 5:15 of Deuteronomy says, i.e. as if you yourself were a slave and went out to freedom and were redeemed. So this is a very interesting idea that the Rambam is taking out of the Torah here, is that it really is its own mitzvah to think of oneself as, and to show and comport oneself, whatever laharot etzmo, right, to present oneself, to show oneself, to appear as, to think of oneself, whatever it may be, as a slave at that moment. It's interesting. It doesn't say to think as, to show, to present. It's very much almost a very external thing to appear as a slave. And this is very, very important. And interestingly enough, I want to be careful about what he does command here, right? He doesn't command actually us to be a slave or to think like a slave. He commands us to be as someone who has just left the slavery of Egypt. So we're no longer slaves, even in the beginning, but we've just left slavery. We're basically supposed to think of ourselves right where the Torah portion that's usually read on this day is. And that this is actually a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah in the Torah, that we're supposed to be thinking of ourselves like this, especially on this day at this time. It's interesting that it's not even a certain day is given. This just seems like here, if we take Rambam at his words here, and what he's basically saying, he's not saying it's specifically for the 15th of Nisan, or the day in which we do the Seder, or even the Pesach holiday, but like all the time, we should always think of ourselves as having just left Egypt, right? And maybe that's the reason why we sing the Song of the Sea every morning at davening and during Pesukei de Zimra, during our introduction to davening. But very important part of Passover, very important part of Judaism, is to think of ourselves as someone who has just went out of oppression, not someone who who is oppressed and is still oppressed, but someone who has just left it, which is very, very important. I think that's beautiful, because I think it really would be damaging for us to think of ourselves as oppressed, even if we weren't oppressed, right? That would be sort of not very productive, and almost like making ourselves out to be a victim, right? But we're not a victim. We're winners, right? We just left oppression in that way, And I think that's an important thing to understand in terms of Jewish power and the way in which we self-conceive of ourselves as Jews. It's not people who are being presently oppressed and people who are presently being victimized, but people who have just left oppression, and that we're capable of leaving oppression, which is just so important. And to think of ourselves and put ourselves in that position. And that results in terms of the way in which we actually eat and drink, right? We're actually obligated to eat and to recline during our eating and drinking, which was the manner of free people. This is the way free people ate back in the day. They would eat lying on couches. I always picture like Cleopatra in this, like she's just lying down eating the grapes. So that was the original way that free people ate. And so this really is a good definition of like laharot atzmo, to comport oneself as, to do the behaviors of somebody who is free. Very, very important. And also that's, of course, where the 4 cups of wine come from too, that we're also supposed to be obligated to drink 4 glasses of wine. I guess this is what a free person does, right? And interestingly enough, this mitzvah here is both obligatory for men and women. Traditionally, in Jewish halacha, women are not bound by positive time-bound commandments, and this is a positive time-bound commandment. So you would expect women not to be part of this, at least for drinking the 4 cups of wine on Seder night. But they're included in this specifically. The reason, according to the Gemara, is that it was in many sources. We actually studied this in the Menorat HaMaor. It's because of the Nashim Sid Kaniyot. It's because the righteous women that we were redeemed from Egypt. So since the women were such a big part and a big cause of the miracles that happened, they should take part in the celebration in just the same way, which is just so beautiful. And I love this because from an egalitarian perspective, and being conservative and everything like that in our Judaism, we're egalitarian, which is really beautiful. And obviously believes that men and women should have equal roles here. And what Maimonides, I think, he's showing us so beautifully is if you think that women are part of the story and part of the redemption and part of what we're reading in the Torah, then they should be involved in the mitzvot, right? That's the implication that's being created here by the Gemara, and of course put into code in the Rambam. So if you follow that logic out, at least from a Masorti and from a conservative perspective and an egalitarian perspective, like that's why we include women in the mitzvot, why we say they need to have an equal portion, because if we don't, then we have to say that they're not really part of the story in the same way that men are. And here that's written out, I think, just beautifully, clearly here, and shows what we're all about in our egalitarianism as a conservative movement. Let's now turn to Menorat HaMaor on Passover. This will be our last day of doing Midrashim and Agadot from Menorat HaMaor about Pesach, because, of course, this is our last day when we'll be making a podcast on Pesach. We'll start actually at the beginning of the Sefer on our next episode, which will be really great. But let's end our discussion here about the plague. So if you were listening in previous episodes, if you haven't, it's okay. We've been talking about the spiritual meaning behind the plagues, sort of what was God trying to prove, and the general idea is that God is trying to show that God is truly the one in charge, that Pharaoh is not in charge, that truly God is in control of everything, that God's power is bigger than any God that there's ever been before, or has been thought of previously in Egypt, and specifically over the 4 elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. Right. So there are basically plagues. There are 2 plagues that align to fire, 2 plagues that align to wind, 2 plagues that align to earth, and 2 plagues that align to water. And then we learned that the 9th plague, we spoke about this in the last episode, the plague of darkness really is supposed to show that God is in control of even things outside of the world, right? The space and the planets and the stars and everything. There really is no bound to God's power. But of course we know that, well, Pharaoh still didn't release the Jewish people. And it's at that point when God says, okay, well, if I've tried to show you very clearly that I'm in control, I think I've showed you very clearly that I'm in control. And so now I have to appeal to your most base instincts, which is basically to kill you, right? Because the death of the firstborn, who's a firstborn? Pharaoh was a firstborn. So this meant in some ways the death of Pharaoh or what Pharaoh. So God basically holds this over him, saying, I'm going to kill all these firstborn. And it's at this moment where Pharaoh truly gets afraid and says, I don't want to die. I don't want to be lost, and lets the Jewish people free. And this is the moment when we get that redemption. And I think this is important to understand, is like oftentimes to our base enemies, like it's not yes, they don't believe in the power of God and the strength of God, and it is, they definitely believe in themselves more than God's power necessarily, but that's oftentimes not enough. It's not enough theologically just to be like, oh, well, God has proved that God is powerful, so now I've been won over by your debate. That actually doesn't usually cause much change. What causes change is them being threatened in the most base way, and that's actually what created the change. So I think there's a lesson. There's definitely a lesson to be learned there. I'm glad we sort of learned the lesson of the plagues and learned the lesson that God truly is in charge. But I think there's a lesson to be understood here about like real power, and sometimes real power needs to be used to free the Jewish people from their oppressors and free the Jewish people from people who are hurting them. So I think very, very important lesson here, and this is really tied, but it also I think wonderfully shows the compassion of God. And this is actually brought out in the last part of this teaching from Midrash Tanhuma in Parashat Bo, where the rabbis sort of give a mashal lamelech, an allegory about a king that says, the rabbi said, with the strategy of kings did the Holy One, blessed be he, bring the plagues upon them. When a flesh and blood king wages war against the rebellious province, he sends legions to surround it. First, he cuts off its water supply. If they surrender, good. If not, he proceeds against them, etc., etc., etc. And so I think what is just like a king of this world, what God was doing was first like, doing the proceeding step by step by step, and trying to push them through power to show them that they can't do this. They can't oppress the Jewish people until it finally got to the point where really God had to eliminate them. But that wasn't the first step, right? God could have started this by killing the firstborn, but he did not do that. One, because God wanted to show us and teach the whole entire world, including, of course, the Egyptians, who really is in charge. But also, like, there's this place of like going step by step and not just using all of one's power, but doing the worst thing only if one has to. Because in the end, what really matters, even more than God's kavod and more than God's honor of showing how powerful God is that the Jewish people are freed from persecution and oppression. And really success in these political conflicts should be evaluated by, does it actually make the lives of people actually better? Or have you just gotten some sort of theoretical victory? That's a very important thing to show, and that we have to keep at it until the suffering and the persecution and the oppression against our people actually stops. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.